This is a HeadGum podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Good One, a podcast about jokes. I'm your host, Vulture Senior Editor, Jesse David Fox. This is an interesting episode for a few reasons. So, the first and most immediately apparent reason is our guests are the Lucas brothers, aka Kenny and Keith Lucas, identical twins who do a version of a two-man stand-up routine. As you'll notice, their voices are incredibly similar. That said, as we talk about, Kenny and Keith don't mind if you can't tell which is talking. It's part of what they're trying to explore in their act. The other thing that makes this episode unique is the joke the brothers picked isn't finished. Though they believe eventually the joke will perfectly set up their next hour, they also know it doesn't totally work yet. They partly wanted to do the podcast as a way of thinking through the joke a bit more, giving us a rare opportunity to capture the thought process of a joke while it's still being worked on. If all that sounds potentially kind of heady, buckle in. This is legitimately the headiest conversation of my entire life. Both Kenny and Keith majored in philosophy in college, and the new hour they're working on is a manifestation of a lot of things they learned then and their own personal study. But I should mention, they are really funny and incredibly thoughtful about their stand-up as it relates to the history of comedy. The guys are currently touring, so you can see for yourselves how the joke evolves. As I said, the joke isn't finished yet, so you're about to hear a bit of a rough version of it told at the Helium Comedy Club in Portland a few months back. I feel like I should give a little bit of a heads up. So Bertrand Russell, who plays a big part in this joke, is a Nobel Prize-winning philosopher, logician, historian, known partly for writing the history of Western philosophy. I told you, this conversation's heady as hell. So, here is Keith and Kenny Lucas, or Kenny and Keith Lucas. I'm not sure.
Oh, how you guys doing, Philly? You guys... So this is the last leg of our tour, and we wanted to do it in Philly because we love you motherfuckers. Oh, yeah, you guys are great. You guys are fantastic. I am pandering a little bit, but we gotta do what we gotta do. How many people in here are familiar with the book, A History of Western Philosophy? You raise your hand if you read History of Western Philosophy. Right. You studied it? You studied it? Yeah. You know the whole book?
Don't ask me.
You want to, oh, well, no, we don't have to ask you. You want to summarize it?
You're on the spot. No, not at all, but I have studied a lot. Yeah.
All right, what's chapter 5 about? All right, we'll talk about it later. But look, this is a great book. It got me through my divorce. That's right. Yeah. He was married to the streets. That's right. It was a bitter divorce. Bitter divorce. Streets kept calling. The streets kept calling. It gets annoying. Yeah. Look, we love Bertrand. We love Bertrand. We live by a lot of the quotes that he laid down. That's right. One of the quotes he said, and I quote, and he quotes. Life's a bitch, and then you die. That's right. That's why we get high. Because you never know when you're going to go. That's right.
All right, we are here with the comedians behind the joke you just heard, the Lucas brothers, Keith and Kenny. Lucas, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, man.
So I think a good place to start for the listeners is which one is Keith and which is
Well, I'm sure they won't be able to tell the difference.
They might be able to.
They might be able to.
If they listen closely, I think they can distinguish the two.
I'm Kenny.
And I'm Keith. But how does that help them? I don't know.
Well, I was wondering, how do you feel about that people listening won't be able to necessarily tell the difference, and has your feeling about things like that
That's
evolved?
a great question. I believe that in our current process in comedy, what we're trying to do is sort of shed the ego and fully embrace the concept of the Lucas Bros. I know that sounds weird, but I've been Kenny for long enough. Kenny hasn't accomplished much. He's failed mostly. But the Lucas Bros have been not very successful, but successful enough. And I like being a Lucas Bro, and I am honored by that as my identity.
Yeah, I mean, what's in a name? Names. I don't know. Names are names. I didn't even get to choose my name ultimately. So it's I like the idea of just sort of being an entity and being a brotherhood and focusing more on that concept and making sure that speaks to our identity.
Have you seen The Prestige?
Oh yeah.
All right, cool. Because I had to spoil it for the producer before. Because, like, just so you know, this is the ending of The Prestige. So, for those who haven't seen The Prestige, I'll ruin what happens. The reveal is at the end is that Christian Bale is actually a set of identical twins, and that allows him to pull off this trick that Hugh Jackman goes to incredible lengths to try to pull off. And it's this metaphor for the sacrifice necessary to be artists. And as you said, you are the Lucas brothers as an entity. You also share social media handles. I've emailed with one of you. I don't know which. Maybe it was both. I feel like when I remember, we lived in Greenpoint at the same time.
Yeah,
and
we did.
You guys were like the Lucas brothers, even unrelated to you guys being
Yeah.
How does it or does it not feel that way, like The Prestige?
You certainly make a sacrifice for the art in maintaining an identity that ignores your individual self. I mean, in that respect, it's very similar to The Prestige, but I would say that we don't shy away from it. You know, like we fully embrace the fact that we are identical twins, and on some level, it helps us in our career, but more importantly, it helps us mentally and emotionally. I have my best friend with me at all times. When I travel, I have my best friend, and we talk about comedy and we philosophize about comedy, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah, and it's also a person there to sort of check you if you're fucking up or if you're messing up. There's always just like you have that stabilizing force. So we've sort of decided to embrace the concept and make it a shared philosophy.
You know, take it to its logical conclusion. We're identical twins.
We look the same.
We look the same.
It
We
is
talk
what it is.
very similarly, and we dress alike. And let's see where it goes.
This is what God intended.
That's right.
As we get into sort of the process of the writing, I want to back up a little bit. So you're both in your third year of law school, and you're both flirting with comedy at different degrees. You're not. You went to different schools, and I believe it was Kenny was pushing to do stand-up more.
Yeah.
And you found a video of the Sklar brothers, and it was a bit of a light bulb, and you sent it to Keith, and it seemed to be the same thing.
That's right.
What did you see?
Well, I saw their bit about Dice Clay, I believe, which I thought
That's the one
was-
you sent to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I thought it was very funny. But what I was really taken with was their camaraderie and their timing and their ability to deliver a joke at the same time, and just their technique. I was very floored by their technique, and a light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, I think we can do that. I mean, maybe not as well, but I do believe that
It can be done. It was
could
like,
be done.
being able to. We make this joke like they're the Jackie Robinson of twin comedy. You know, they're sort of like they're like, oh, we can do this. You know,
Yeah.
This is like there was that, and when he sent it to me, that's what I thought. I was like, holy shit, like it can be done. Because we grew up watching stand-ups as individuals.
Yeah.
It was Chris Rock, it was Dave Chappelle, it was Martin, it was these otherworldly figures that like, oh, you got to be this transcendent individual black guy or Jewish dude or woman. You got to be this person who's just like, like Roseanne. You got to be a person who just transcends the form. In order for us to do stand-up in the most authentic way, that was most representative and most reflective of our actual lives, it felt necessary for us to stand on stage together.
What they partly represent is, comedy duos had a form, and there's a straight man and the other person. And the Sklar brothers don't necessarily. They sort of do an act. And even outside of twins, I think that in the last 20 years, you see more duos that are coming from the same perspective. I feel like the Broad City Girls, though they are not identical twins, you're not like, oh, one person is this. But I think intra-group, there tends to probably be some sort of dynamic. Is there roles, do you feel like, intentionally or unintentionally you find yourself writing in, and then does that reflect what you guys do off stage?
When we initially started, I would say Kenny sort of handled most of the You would say the transitions.
Yeah, the
and setting up.
transitions, the organization of the set, getting into particular bits where Keith would punch it home or tag.
Or interrupt or disrupt.
I tended to be more rigid, and Keith was more chaotic. But it provided for a healthy balance. Now, you can't tell the difference. Sometimes I set up, sometimes he sets up, sometimes
it's much more free form.
Yeah.
I mean, we're allowing each other to say whatever we want to say. It's I would say it's definitely more freedom in what we're doing now. When we first started, it was just way too rigid.
I guess the sort of dual question is, one, how do you even determine who says which part of which thing? You know, like in this joke, there's no real reason why one person would say one part or the other. There's no, like, there's just sort of one person who, hypothetically, this book got them out of the their divorce from the streets, and the other person who's like, yes, it did.
Yeah.
Is that just sort of like, how do you sort of assign that when you...
Well, for this particular joke, I was married, and so we're sort of making a loose reference to that. So I would have to say, I would have to do
I was married.
Yeah,
it got me through my divorce.
But
and then I would,
Yeah, but for other bits, I mean, it depends on where it lands. I mean, sometimes in a show, we may get mixed up, and I may have to, do a punchline. And once that happens, Keith has to do the setup,
or I might forget a punchline, and then he has to come in and say it, and then I have to, set up. So it's all just a matter of where it's falling on or how it's flowing.
Yeah. So at this point, you both know both. You're both each other's understudies.
Yeah. We're both each other's understudies.
Absolutely.
You have to be.
Right.
Because you might drop the ball one day. You need somebody to pick you up.
I drop the ball all the time.
Same here. All the time. How could you not drop the ball?
So for this joke, before we get to the sort of the larger significance of sort of how this relates to what you're doing next, your act, I just want to sort of talk about how you start being like, this is the material, besides the sort of comedians who are like, well, this happened to me and that was crazy, so now I can talk it on stage. This is a joke that is partly idea driven. What was sort of the process of like, this is a thing that maybe one of you was thinking about or talking about, to like, oh, this is a thing we should talk about on stage, and sort of just the before even writing it, how do you get to the point where we should write about it?
We've been, ever since we started studying philosophy, I'd say we've talked about some of the ideas that we're exploring now in our special. The goal was to try to, become as good as we can get as stand-ups before we were able to speak on themes of death and themes of evidence, and trying to figure out what our philosophy is on life.
We want it to be more reflective and philosophical in our stand-up. And I read this quote from, I believe it was Wittgenstein, who said that a good piece of philosophy can be written or can consist entirely of jokes.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, I was like, okay, I think we can try to make arguments with our comedy. And I wanted to talk about what was happening in our lives, which at the time, we were dealing with, drugs and alcohol and the chase of fame and all those things that just sort of detracted us from our path as amateur philosophers. And so I think we wanted to get back on track.
Yeah.
And that's what sort of motivated us to construct our special in a way that reflected that.
How did sort of this version of this joke come to...
Life's a bitch and then you die?
We grew up on Illmatic and 90s hip-hop, and it's had a deep impact on just shaping what our general philosophy is. And that song in particular, and that lyric in particular, I think was sort of encapsulated a lot of what we were trying to unpack with our special. So, life's a bitch, then you die. It's very nihilistic. How do you respond to nihilism? Well, you can either kill yourself or you get high. So we say, okay, let's just get high, because you never know when you're going to go.
And
I mean, I think that lyric alone sort of embodies the themes that we're trying to get at.
We want to transition. Ideally, we like to transition from nihilism to idealism.
Some sort of spiritual idealism. But how do you get there logically?
Yeah.
Or do you even need logic to get there? Like that's where we're at. Like perhaps we were over-relying on logic, and perhaps we were over-relying on reason, and maybe that took us away from the spiritual.
Yeah.
On a basic level, what is writing for you? Like a comedian. I mean, it can range, but a lot of comedians, especially that are as experienced as you guys now, would be like, oh, I have an idea. I'll go on stage with the idea and talk about it for 3 months until it's done. What do you guys do now, considering that you both have to talk and not step over each other?
Honestly, a lot of it's been just conceptualizing. It's not so much about getting on stage. It's more about you got to get on stage, obviously. You have to get on stage eventually. But for us, it's like we need to conceptualize the whole piece. We want to see every angle. We want to understand the thematic parts. We want to understand the philosophical stakes. We want to understand the emotional stakes. We want to see it through its end. And then once we understand the full piece, then we start plugging in what we need.
Yeah.
And then we start working on individual bits and trying to fine tune it.
That's right.
Is this written out exactly as it's done? Like, is it literally written down? Is there a piece of paper?
We've written a script for our next special. It's roughly 60 pages. And we try to adhere to it word for word, but sometimes we deviate. It happens.
That's interesting, because there's a section I want to ask you about. I believe it goes, this is a great book. It got me through the divorce. That's right. It really did. He was married to the streets.
Yeah.
There's a version of that joke, maybe not told by you, but that could just be like, oh, it's a great book. It got me through the divorce. He was married. Like a shorter version of that joke.
Sure.
What is rhythmically or comedically the value of that's right? It really, like these sort of the parts that are...
That's a great question. I think my brother and I, we really strive for our set to feel conversational. And when we add in those little asides where we're talking to one another, or where we're sort of like interjecting sort of, that's right, or yes, kind of improving. It makes it feel more conversational. We let the audience in a little bit. We show that perhaps we're struggling with the concept, or we're thinking about the concept as we deliver it.
Yeah.
And I think that
it makes it feel more in the moment too. This person's aware. Acutely listening to his brother or his partner on stage.
Yeah.
But also, sometimes I'm really just listening. Sometimes I'm just like, where is he going?
That's right.
Sometimes I don't know where he's going.
I do go rogue every once in a while, and it requires Keith to pay very close attention.
How much then are you editing based on reaction, or for the most part, you just sort of stick to what you're intending to? What is the next step of writing as a comedian is how people respond.
We'll have the jokes written out, and then we'll try them, and then based on some sort of reaction, we can adjust our set, and we always adjust. We're always listening to the audience to see because sometimes the audience might throw out a punchline.
Yeah,
that's a funny punchline.
No, it's happened. Yeah,
What was the joke?
We were in New York. We were doing Better Days
PD show,
and we were struggling with a line for a particular joke. And then we sort of polled the audience, and then the one audience,
he was
one
dressed
member,
like a cowboy.
Yeah.
He was like, he just said tracking. He was like, that's it.
It's
tracking. That's the line.
And
it's been crushing ever since.
Yeah.
So you got to keep your ears and your eyes open to the streets, man, because the people know.
The people know.
Has this joke changed much?
It's gotten to be more relevant as a result of Kevin's death, and it's become more now the words feel like they matter. Before we would say life's a bitch and then you die, that's why we get high, because you never know when you're going to go. We said it sort of flippantly, but with Kevin's death, it's like, oh no, that shit's true, man. You could be alive and then you could be dead, and that struggle with life or death would make anyone want to turn to some sort of narcotic or alcohol, or and for us, we really want to say you don't have to do those things, regardless of the existential gravity of life or death. You can get high off life. I'm sorry I said it, but yeah, you can, man. You could find things that can supplement that void.
The streets, as you said, it's a recurring theme in your work.
Oh yeah.
What it is about this? What is
Streets, man.
What is it?
I mean, you ever been to Newark, New Jersey?
I have no idea. I might have been, but I've not spent a lot of time
If
there.
you've ever been to Newark, New Jersey, then I think you will fully understand the concept of the streets. I mean, it's two societies, man. Like you have regular society, and then you have the streets.
That's right. And it's perfectly encapsulated in Newark, I think, because you have like decent human, upstanding, and
middle class,
and then you have just like just
hood
violence
niggas,
and chaos.
And
it's like you gotta sort of, how do you hold that together?
Hood niggas don't care about, like, they're the hardest to make laugh. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know.
They
I
are.
don't know. They could be the funniest though.
Yes,
because they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
But the streets is just like, it's a concept where it's like, oh, it's like you don't give a fuck about the rules, but they have their own rules. It's a contradiction almost.
Yeah.
It's a family, but they hate each other. It's the devil, but it's God. It's all there, and it's scary sometimes because anything can happen.
Yeah.
Is it a thing that's important for y'all to stay in touch with?
Oh yeah.
Because we still got people out there, man.
Yeah.
My dad, my little brother's out there on those streets. You know what I mean? Like he you know what I mean? He just got arrested. You know what I mean? So shit happens there all the time, and we still have a connection there. And we're gonna always have a connection there because our family's there. And it's wild.
But it becomes this like very difficult situation where you're constantly questioning whether or not your comedy adheres to the rules of the streets. You know what I mean? Like, do they watch Jimmy Fallon on the streets? I don't think they.
I don't think they watch Jimmy Fallon. Maybe they are.
Maybe they do.
I think the hood watches Jimmy Fallon.
But it's a larger question about being black and whether or not you're being authentically black or if you're being white.
Well, some people would argue that, coming from where we come from, that's not the authentic version.
Sure.
And I would respectfully disagree. I mean, I think anybody with black skin is living an authentic black life because you don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
But whatever. That becomes too metaphysical.
I feel like actually we did a story, but like you guys are of a generation of comedians that I think is carving out what that means to be a black comedian. There's black comedy. Like there is a comedy scene that is defined by being black. There are black rooms.
Yeah.
And there had always been black comedians who not existed to it, but you come from a group of people that I feel like, I don't know if you set out to do it or it's just a timing thing or if it's a generational thing, that all at the same time is like a bunch of people that seek to redefine that or just push the boundaries of it.
I mean, the way I think, like, people forget, man, like, even if you're in the hood, like, you're still getting the same TV shows.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you're still watching the same stuff as the dudes in the suburbs. You're still sort of like, the culture is almost still kind of the same. I mean, it's like, it's strange how we got the Animaniacs, we got Power Rangers, we got these things, and that shit influenced us, and it influenced our comedy, and it allowed us to connect to people outside of where we were from.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the impact of TV.
And I've always felt, not always, but early on in my comedy career and also in my development as a philosopher and a law student, I felt as though the boxes drawn by Hollywood, they're very rigid. It's almost like they want to put people in a box and say, if you're black, you got to perform here. If you're white, you got to perform there. If you're a woman, you got to perform in front of women. And I'm like, I don't believe comedy was designed to be fragmented.
Absolutely not.
I see it as a whole. I think that a funny woman can be funny in front of whomever.
Yeah.
And a funny white guy can be funny in front of whomever. And I think that there's a universal nature embedded in the structure of jokes and the logic of jokes that makes it race neutral.
Yeah. I talk about references a good amount on this show, and there's a reference could be inclusive to the people that understand it, and it's exclusive hypothetically to the people who don't. And there's a version of this joke that would be broader or hackier where you then, you add a tag that's like, but isn't it Nas who said that or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying that is an option to let more people in. What do you like about how it stands where it's like there's some people who will be like, they'll get that it's a contrast, and obviously this philosopher didn't say it, but there's people that will get it more.
No, it's funny you say that because we've but we've had some issues with eliciting laughs from the idea, in part because, you have an inclination to want to go that hacky route and say, oh, wait, this is Nas. And we've done that. Mm-hmm. But now we're like, well, maybe we should do something different. So what we did is we created a PowerPoint,
a picture
of Bertrand, similar to
superimposed on Nas's album.
Got it.
Yeah.
So the punchline is actually shown. Our buddy Mookie put it together, but Kenny had the concept, and we I think
I was like a visualization of it completes the joke. If people can see Bertrand Russell in that format where he looks like he's Nas, I mean, that's hilarious. It's gonna always get a laugh.
Yeah, it'll get a chuckle at least. So so that was more setup, and it's like we've been trying to. That's why we wanted to choose that, because we were trying to figure out the punchline, and I think we
figured it out today.
We figured it out.
I mean, yesterday. Yeah.
Oh, literally it was yesterday?
Yeah, I think it literally was yesterday. We'll see if it gets a laugh, but I think that's the punchline.
I've heard you guys talk about how you essentially go to couples therapy together, or that you're. The story they say was that you're going separately to the same person talking about the exact same thing. But I think it's really interesting, and I feel like writing partners in general should go to couples. I also think everyone should go to. How has it changed your comedy?
Well, we've been like we used to think that we didn't have any secrets between us. Like this was just like we knew everything about each other and yada yada yada. But once we went to therapy, we realized, oh shit, there are some things.
He knows my favorite porn category
exactly.
now.
I know his favorite porn actor. I know some things that he did that I didn't know before, and he knows some shit that so like it's made us more open and more transparent, I think. And I don't know, the therapists have a way of like asking the right questions to get you to talk about shit that you normally wouldn't talk about in front of people. So I think it allowed us.
Like I cried in front of Keith.
Yeah.
And I think and how that impacts our comedy is we're just more transparent.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'll tell him if I think a joke sucks, and he'll tell me if he thinks it's funny, and rather than getting into vicious fights or not talking to one another for 2 days, we were like, okay, let's go talk to our therapist and see why we have these disagreements.
It's like we figured out a better way to communicate with one another, and I think that's the importance of any sort of team. You got to learn how to communicate with one another.
Sure.
You got to learn how to communicate your frustrations and communicate your praises. You know what I mean? So I never learned that. I never learned how to do it with Kenny. I sort of just saw him as an extension of me.
Yeah.
So if I was mad at myself, I would just be mad at him and not see him as an individual. But in therapy, she sort of encouraged us to like look at each other as individuals. Like, we're an entity, we're a team, and all that jazz. But he's still an individual with his own feelings and emotions, and like being able to communicate my thoughts now, I think, has made
You're a much better communicator.
Yeah, I think it's made our comedy a lot stronger.
Let's say there was a joke or there's a part of here that one liked and the other one didn't. What is the sort of process of determining if it can stay in or if it like
we go by the evidence.
That's right.
What joke gets the laughs.
Yeah.
Like if a joke ain't hitting and it's just like bringing down the set and it gets chucked. I mean, we try not to play favorites. We try to keep it very, very democratic and scientific, and that's the fairest way, really. You can go in with a bias with a joke because you
I think all my jokes are great.
Yeah, exactly. But the people are going to speak and they're going to laugh and they're going to make the decision for you. So it makes our process a lot easier.
People don't know how to react when they see twins.
No,
they go crazy. Like we were in the supermarket looking for some Jell-O.
Yep.
And we were just about to pick it out, and then some dude came out of nowhere, and he was like, "Yo, you guys have a stick of double mint gum?" That's what he said. Now I know that sounds like an innocent question to most people, but to twins, it's mad disrespectful.
Absolutely.
So we were about to check this nigga. And I think that he saw that we were angry, so he tried to like calm the situation down. He was like, yo, I'm sorry if I offended you guys. It's just, in the commercials, twins always have gum. In those Doublemint gum commercials, they have gum, so I figured you two guys had a stick. Like, that's shitty logic.
Yeah.
And why is this dude taking commercials so seriously? Like, did he do that with everything? You know what I mean? Like, did he go up to quirky white women and ask for progressive insurance? I like that. Yeah, right. You should try another one?
Let's try it.
All right. Does he go up to white babies and ask for E-Trade stock advice?
So I was going to ask you about having the same comedic point of view or the same sense of humor, but since we're about to talk about philosophy more, I want to ask a slightly elevated version of the question. So my partner went to law school, and she told me about a version of, I guess, postmodern contract theory, which is the meeting of the minds. Have you heard of this?
Meeting of the minds concept?
Yeah. All right, cool. I've learned bastardized it to talk about comedy, which is essentially, for those who don't know, it's a contract is both parties have a shared, the hope is that both parties have a shared understanding of what an agreement is. And then in my brain, it is a contract's only as valid as how much both people have the same understanding of it, but two people can't have the exact same understanding of a thing, because how do you know my green is your green or whatever?
Exactly.
And when I learned that or thought about it, I was like, comedy is a process of sharing, hoping that you could help the other person have the audience have a shared understanding of how you see a thing.
Yep.
You've only lived your life. You've only been essentially performing comedy as this thing, though you've done stuff separately. As partners who are identical twins, how much do you feel like you have a meeting of the minds over the art that you create?
I would say that 95% of our process is connected to us having a meeting of them, right? Like
I would say we have a mutually implied trust of one another in terms of how we conceptualize our material. And yeah, I think that after a while, if you've been working with someone for 10 years but living with someone for 33 years, then yeah, there is a meeting of the minds with regard.
I wonder how much of that is like nature versus nurture, though. Like, is it because we've spent so much time together that we tend to come to an agreement or have a meeting of the minds on particular topics? Or
yeah, it would be interesting if we were two, we were separate entities who still shared a similar
brave one. Yeah, because it's like you have the same reference points, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's almost unfair. It's like the perfect contract with one another because we have the same information. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I would say yes, but I think
I wonder if that's true for other duos who aren't privileged to have someone who looks exactly like them.
But you see other writing partners, and I see how they interact with one another, and it seems as if they've built up a level of of that kind of trust where they do have a meeting of the minds. I mean, I'm watching Diallo and Bashir and just watching how they interact with one another.
Yeah.
We'll be back with more Lucas Brothers after this word from our sponsor. Hi, it's me, Jesse, the host of the podcast you're listening to. I'm just here to do that thing where I ask you to subscribe if you haven't yet, because it's very useful for, the computers and the robots who manage them. And if you have subscribed, can you rate the show on Apple Podcasts? If you've rated it, can you write a review? One thing with the review, if possible, can you try to write a funny one? I get some earnest ones and I really like them, but I can't read them on the show because they'll make me cry and then you won't respect me anymore. So, for example, this is one that I got recently and I'm going to start crying. So, you've been warned. So, the title of the review is This is a Really Good One from Miss Miss Nider. So this person wrote, I've binged the show like a madman for the last month or so on the recommendation from my brother-in-law. Side note, thank you to that person. And then back to the review. It's so good and extremely insightful. As an artist myself, It is wonderful to hear comedians talk through their process and all the thought that they put into it. I listen to all the episodes, even if I haven't heard of the comedian, and now I'm crying and it's really embarrassing. So try to write funny reviews if you have the time. If you don't and you listen, that's truly enough. So I love you so much. Back to the show. We are back with the Lucas brothers. Let's talk about philosophy even more and the idea of this joke. But for context to those listening, I know you majored in philosophy in college, but you've talked about how you've gotten into it again more recently. What was it? How did that sort of come about?
Well, it was my disdain for Hollywood, just the sort of glib nature and superficial nature of the process. And I was like, I got to turn to something that I find to be a bit more substantive. And I started reading Bertrand Russell's A History of Western Philosophy, and it sort of reinvigorated my passion for philosophy. It just keeps me grounded. Like whenever I think that, oh man, I just got this gig, I'm the greatest in the world, and then I remind myself that, oh no, it's been done before, or you're going to die someday, or it's really not that relevant. What about the
ontological nature of reality? Why the fuck are we here? You know, you start asking yourself deeper questions. I mean, you know, because I think with philosophy, like what Kenny said, it just sort of keeps you grounded. It keeps me grounded for sure. I mean, ever since I've been studying it, it's allowed me to sort of stay here, but also my mind has been able to go elsewhere. So that's why I appreciate it. And I think, I don't know, I guess it was a reaction to Hollywood, but it was also just we love philosophy. Yeah. We love reading it. It's just very entertaining. I mean, these guys and these
the
girls
stories,
their stories, the context of where philosophy is developed and how their philosophies develop over time. I mean, it's fascinating.
And it also has huge implications on how we do comedy. I think there's a very strong connection between philosophy and comedy. I mean, they both were born during ancient Greece, and I think that there are some logical similarities between a joke and a syllogism, and I think that
can you explain that? I was going to ask you, you on WTF you said comedy is a disruption of logic, and you also said a joke is a valid argument, and it both I felt like I wanted to hear.
I don't think that a joke.
So a syllogism, an Aristotelian syllogism would be premise, conclusion. The conclusion follows from the premises that you set up.
Sure.
So if an argument is both valid and sound, then both premises would have to follow deductively to a true conclusion. In stand-up and with jokes, you can have two seemingly true setups, or a setup that's kind of true, but the punchline tends to be, a bit off kilter, thus making it invalid. So that's when I say that a joke is a disruption of logic. That's essentially what I'm saying, and I'm referencing a particular type of joke. There are other styles of jokes that don't necessarily adhere to that rigid formula, but if you take it to its most basic structure, I'd say there are a lot of similarities between the idea of a joke and logic.
Also in the, I believe it's the WTF, you said, one of you is a rationalist and one of you is an empiricist. Which is which, and what does that mean, and how does that relate to sort of the roles?
That's a good question. I mean, I think if I had to take a guess on how Kenny would answer this, Kenny would say he's the rationalist and I'm the empiricist. And the empiricist, the school of John Locke and David Hume and what's the other guy? Bentham. I mean, these are guys who sort of put a lot of weight in experience, going out into the world and seeing and feeling and absorbing it, and then sort of making your philosophy based on what you experience in life. It really infused in like science and experimentation and experience, whereas the rationalists, which were people like Kant and Spinoza and Descartes, they thought you could stay in a room and sort of just mentally figure shit out.
That knowledge is already
innate.
Yeah. It's innate.
You just gotta pull it out.
Yeah,
and just it requires heavy thinking, and you can pull it out. So,
and they cite mathematics usually and logic.
So how does that then, how does then take that next step of like, how do you feel like that relates to how you create or what you create?
I would say that, and I'm guessing other people would argue that too, that I tend to go out more, put myself out there, experience the world a little bit more. Kenny, it's more, he conceptualizes. He can piece things together in his head and sort of visualize the whole piece, whereas I sort of have to live a little bit more in order for me to get my comedy to be where it is. So I think that's how we do it, but that was like an old way of existing. I think now we're both pretty...
Yeah, I think we like to sort of shy away from the binary and recognize that it's
not either or.
No.
Yeah.
I think that was the realization that we had. One's not the empiricist and one's the rationalist. We're both sort of a little bit of both, and we sort of have to start seeing the world in a less binary way.
So you talked a little bit in the first half about what it is about this quote that sort of summarizes a lot of what you're saying. Can you explain just sort of how you explore it or sort of certain examples of that? I mean, like, obviously this material is still being developed, but I think examples will be just sort of helpful, I imagine, to listeners who are trying to what this means in sort of practice.
So we say life's a bitch and then you die. That's how we get high. And so
that's our thesis.
That's our thesis. And what we try to do, and I'm not exactly certain if we're successful, we'll find out soon, is we try to examine the initial claim. Well, is life a bitch? And what does that mean? And for us, we say life is a bitch because we grew up poor. We had an abusive stepfather. We got bullied. We just lost our friend.
We have PTSD.
We
had a drug addiction.
Yeah. We drink a lot. And life on the surface seems like it's a bitch. And so that's how we try to unpack it in the special. Some may disagree. I'm sure Will Smith doesn't think his life is a bitch. He has a pretty great life. So I don't know if our conclusion would necessarily follow if in the hands of someone who probably thinks life isn't that bad.
Yeah. So if life is a bitch, then the conclusion is death, right? Like it's either you kill yourself or you decide to get high. And that's sort of what we're trying to understand. We're trying to understand the logic of that statement. And we're trying to see if our initial premise is valid.
Yeah.
What made you want to do, it's, especially in the United States, it's not common for people to do shows, like opposed to doing hours, like to do these sort of composed things. It feels like Mike Birbiglia was fighting a good fight for a really long time. I think Nanette will make it more popular, I think, just generally. But what for you guys are like, this is what we are as comedians, opposed to, all right, there'll be some stuff about dating, there'll be some stuff about
It's interesting that you mentioned Mike Birbiglia. We had an opportunity to open for Mike Birbiglia last year. And we were conceptualizing this piece, but we weren't sure how to do it, because it's a tough thing to do to try to tell a full story.
Yeah.
So having an opportunity to see the master up close and personal was what I think really, really pushed it into high gear. It was like, oh, you have to really, really conceptualize the whole piece.
That's right.
Not just like, oh, I want to tell a story about death. You have to say, okay, so what's the story about death that you want to tell? And what are the philosophical... You have to approach it like a movie.
Yeah.
What are the philosophical stakes? What are the emotional stakes?
Yeah.
What's the midpoint? What's the conclusion? And how he did it was mind-blowing. Just seeing seeing it piece by piece by piece, and then to finally see it on Broadway, I was like, oh yeah, that's how you got to do it.
You don't have to sort of do a bunch of the jokes, but sort of how does one actually even do it? Like, in so much as stand-up is a form in which people either, they bring up some sort of theme, they express it, or here's a story that happened. What does it look like in practice?
So my brother and I will sit for a few hours sort of conceptualizing and constructing the order of our set, and then we'll branch off and write a fairly detailed outline, roughly 10 to 15, perhaps 20 pages of how we believe the story should flow with exposition and indications of where we might want to use like charts or graphs or whatever. And then from there, once we believe that the outline is sufficient, we'll transition over to script, we'll divide it where I'll do one half, he'll do the other half, and then we swap. I edit the half that he wrote, he edits the half that I wrote, and then we, read it aloud just to see if it coheres.
And then we'll go on stage and fuck it all up.
Yeah.
So the specific quote, to prepare, I listened to over and over again just the intro to an intro to Western philosophy because I was like, this will I'll understand, and I think an intro does a decent job of like, this is the theme of the book you're going to do. So the quote that sort of reminded me most, or I was thinking about, is uncertainty in the presence of vivid hopes and fears is painful, but must be endured if we wish to live without the support of comforting fairy tales, which is his way of being like, religion is bad.
Yeah.
You were both raised, I believe, religious, and or that was
Baptist,
awesome.
yeah.
How much of this show a rejection and a re-examination of that part of it, a reaction to being raised that way?
Yeah, I mean, our philosophical journey certainly started with a rejection of Christianity and of God and of the way our mom wanted us to be, and we started to firmly embrace a more existential philosophy, which moved us away from the spiritual. And in this in our special, we examine that for sure.
Yeah, I think in the special we like to track the transition from sort of forced spiritualism by way of organized religion to a freer form of spiritualism, divorced from organized religion. But in that journey, we discuss our materialism, our nihilism,
our atheism.
These are things that sort of happen as a result of moving away from God, moving away from, some sort of spiritual connection to
and sort of
nature.
Focusing more on the individual and those sort of philosophies, which I think can lead you astray if you divorce yourself from the spiritual and put it all on yourself.
Yeah,
that burden, I think, is just too heavy,
too overwhelming.
Yeah, too heavy of a burden for humans to handle. So we hope that we've rediscovered our love for God, and
It's just a different God.
a different God,
A different definition of what God
a different definition of what God can be, but certainly something higher than us, higher than the individual.
A lot of this is, the existentialist question of meaning and such like that. And, existentialism, especially in art, became particularly popular after World War II. And I think both world wars sort of famously left people being like, well, this is a meaningless existence.
Yeah.
Like, how can these things happen? And both for you, but also it feels like there is more existentialist art in the last 10 years or 5 years than I felt like before that. Do you feel like there's, what do you think that might be? Do you think there were traumatic events? And also, what do you think makes sense for that for you guys personally?
And are you referring to the movements and progress made by comedians who happen to be African American, or are you saying that you see this across the board?
I'm trying to say it's hard because the example I always think of is Atlanta, but there's probably other examples. But Atlanta, I was like, this is an example of like this is
sure,
but also Ergon Dre, but also Aqua Teen Hunger Force. I would say 9/11 was probably the event that sort of pushed us all to question whether or not there is a God, because it was just so visceral to see,
and they played it repeatedly,
and we're all youngins. I mean, to see something like that, I mean, even World War II was bad, but we were able to not see that shit. To see war up close and personal,
that'll shake anyone to their core.
And I think that's had a deep impact on a lot of artists, but also the rise of Trump. I mean, I think that has shaked a lot of people.
Do you guys read and obviously you read a lot of philosophers, but do you read certain psychologists, like psychoanalyst theory, as much?
I like to read. He's also a philosopher as well, but
William James,
the founder, I guess the father of modern psychology. I think, in America. I read him a lot, and I really appreciate his writings, especially The Will to Believe. It's a very, very good essay.
There's, do you know this guy Otto Rank? He's Freud's second. He's not super. He's Freud's like right hand man, but he specifically worked with a lot of artists. Like he was Henry Miller's therapist, and he's his main therapist. And a lot of his writing is specifically about the relationship of psychotherapy and art and the psychology of artists. But there are sort of two things that, preparing for this, that jumped out at me in this sort of Nas quote. And one, he has an idea that says that like the easiest way to avoid sort of fears of death and find meaning in life is religion. Is the easiest way. If you can believe in it, do it, because it gives you an answer and it's nice. But otherwise, the people that are best prepared for it are artists, because it is a job of creating worlds and creating meaning. The second thing that he said that I think you'll respond to is sort of the only cure for neuroses, sort of the having a questioning mind, is the need for legitimate foolishness. And essentially needing to create disruptions, because like it's almost like there's a meaningless world, and the way to respond to it is not necessarily to always put more meaning onto it. Do these ideas resonate with you?
No, I think they resonate 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that at least within our next special, I mean, we are trying to sort of reestablish our love for God, and I think that does help people cope with the coldness of the world. I mean, just it's like a blanket. Yeah. And, you know, whether or not this blanket is real or fake, I don't know, but it does help me get through the day. So,
do we need more serious stuff? I mean, like, isn't existence already, like, the worst? You know, you're going to die someday.
And everybody you know is going to die.
Even if you live forever, everyone else around you is going to die. So it's like that burden of existence should encourage comedians to be more, I don't want to say light. I think there's a responsibility on part of some comedians to address the political and do it in whichever way they feel fit. But for those comedians who may not necessarily be inclined to do politics, why not keep it light? You know, why not
just give people what they want?
Give the people what they
is
want.
Already tough, so give them some popcorn. If they want some popcorn. I mean, it's like the idea is like comedy is service.
Yeah,
like, you know, we got our own existential woes and we got to unpack our psychological issues and whatever. But it's like at the end of the day, we're serving others. You know, we're also helping other people get through the day. And I'm starting to see it more like that now. Like, it's not about me so much as it's about the people who are working 9 to 5s and they don't have a creative outlet to tell jokes. So they come to us to laugh. And it's like, if you see it like that, and you divorce it from the money and the fame and all that nonsense, and you see it just as service, I think it does make it a more spiritual thing.
How do you divorce it from the...
I mean, you can't divorce it entirely. I'm saying just like divorce your reasons for what you're doing it for. You know what I mean? For me, at least, it can't be about the money and the fame. It can't be about that shit. I mean, because that's just not sustainable.
I agree.
And I think it's bad for the soul.
Yeah.
Sort of beyond it, what do you want the audience to get from this? And sort of consciousness, I guess, the sort of the universal consciousness in general. What do you want? What is your grand ambitions of this piece, or sort of your work in general?
Well, I hope that in listening to the set that, you know, the audience recognize that, you know, we are struggling with these existential issues and we are trying to make them humorous, and that comedians are capable and do change. And that the gimmick that you may believe is, you know, who they are, the end-all, be-all, that may not necessarily be the case. I want the audience to recognize that comedians are open, capable of change, and receptive to change. And not all comedians, but some.
And that, we are grappling with some existential issues about life and death. I mean, death is real. It's final, and it's something that we've grappled with since we've been here. You know, like I've always had these thoughts, and You know, you never know. You know, you never know what you're going to do. You never know how you're going to approach life. So
Yeah.
I hope that, like, if a person is struggling with questions of life and death, and that they watch our thing and they see, like, yeah, there are ways to.
I'm not going to die now.
No, not that I'm not going to die now.
You cure death.
No, they definitely can't cure death.
Suicide hotline.
Suicide hotline.
Lucas
Call people.
Rose
Call
will go,
therapists.
yeah.
Do what you got to do. But for people who are struggling with some of the questions that we're struggling with, we hope that, like, you know, they're taking it seriously, and that they are trying to figure out ways to answer them, and it's not always just about killing yourself. Sometimes it's just about, you know, creating and embracing your family and loving life as it is.
It's interesting because it's like, instead of sort of being like, oh, we will give them answers, you're like, we'll give you I
have no answers.
sort of like a model for looking for answers.
Yeah. Just a model for looking. Like we have no answers because there may not be a clean answer, but there are, I think, ways to appropriately ask the questions.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can help people do that.
Yeah.
Do you know the British philosopher Derek Parfit or Parfait? I don't know him very well, so I'm not going to pretend I do. But there was a New Yorker profile of him that I heard about because Mike Schur read it, and it helped him inspire to do The Good Place. The profile's really about he wanted to write a book because he had all these fears about death. And what he landed on and found comfort is that there's less distinction between people than we think there is.
Sure.
You know, he writes there's a difference between my life and the life of other people's, but that difference is less.
Yeah.
It's a bit Buddhist, but, you know, saying like, and I think there's a lot in sort of the goal of trying to understand that, sort of become as much peace being like we are part of a consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard you talk about it, and it feels like this is an idea that might come natural to you, but I think you, as identical twins, as these people that have this meeting of minds, are almost as close as people have to being like, this is one. So we're so one, we're two people and one at the same time. So all that to say, do you know, you are doing this material, and anyone could hypothetically talk about anything, but why do you feel like you're uniquely qualified to do material around these things?
Well, the twin stuff, obviously, because we're twins. You know, the black stuff, we're black. I mean, I hate the answers that I'm giving you, but
no, I mean, I think that when two people go through a similar hardship, it just gives more credence to what a person is saying when you have two people who have actually experienced the same hardship. You know what I mean? So if I get on stage and talk about, you know, being poor and black and yada yada yada, it's like, okay, another guy be talking about being poor. But then when another nigga gets on stage and we're together talking,
it's
about
funny
that
now.
Shit, oh shit, now it's
two of them living the same broke poor life.
It's just a little bit more comedic. So it's like, I think that it was like this gimmick sort of it's more inviting for people, and so they're willing to hear all this hard shit because it's this silly gimmick that people can just like, oh, it's just two twins who look the same. So I don't know if that makes us qualified, but it certainly does allow for us to talk about darker stuff in a more lighthearted way. Which I don't know if I answered the question. Maybe I didn't.
Yeah, I don't think you did, because the question was, what makes us qualified to address the topics that we address?
I don't know what makes us qualified to address the topics that we address.
Because no one's told us we can't. I would say that's the answer.
Was I trying
Until
to
someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, y'all motherfuckers can't talk about that."
Because look, we're trying to unpack some shit and that happened in our lives, and it just so happens that it covers a lot of different things. I don't know if we're certainly not qualified to talk about philosophy at the highest level, but it's something that we can joke about in our set.
It works for one or two punchlines. By that point, you're like, all right, we're losing.
I don't think I can write a thesis paper on this shit. And I don't know.
I think I can't remember, there's a quote from that intro to that book that's something like, just the thinking of philosophy makes you a philosopher in some way.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, in many of them, you're like, we decided to care about this.
Yeah.
And so as we get to be it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the short answer. It's like, I love philosophy. I love philosophizing. I don't know if that makes me qualified to talk about philosophy, but I certainly love it. And I love having the outlet to talk about it in such a fucking weird, funny way.
It's fun, yeah. Like, we had aspirations of getting a PhD and going to Princeton and becoming doctors and teaching. And I'm like, man, I would have regretted that decision, because in stand-up you get to travel across the globe and spew whatever nonsense that's in your head. And obviously and I don't want to say every comic approaches their act with intention, but I know we do for a fact. And it feels sort of refreshing to be able to mention Bertrand Russell in my set, or Hume or Aristotle, and people were like, these guys are weird, man.
It's like, it's great. It just gives us a little bit more material. You know, we have a lot of philosophers to cover. I think hours of material right there. You could do a whole hour down a lot.
I think Socrates was the first nigga.
Yeah, he was. Absolutely.
I think he was
we said this on Holmes.
Oh yeah.
Socrates is the first nigga.
Yeah. And I want to work it into a bit, but I truly believe it. He abandoned his kids. He drank wine, and all he did was sit around with his homies and talked about nonsense that was proven to be wrong. So I'm like, that's
and he's the father,
and he got tried unjustly and executed.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's some nigga shit.
He's the father of
and he's father of Western philosophy.
That sound means it's time for our final segment. It's a laughing round. It's like a lightning round, but because it's a comedy, it's a laughing round. Do either of you, both of you, have a favorite joke, like a street joke?
Well, I've been listening to a lot of Red Fox, and he says some things that, I mean, it's not the most clever thing, but he did this one joke where he was like, I don't know if this is my favorite joke, but he said he saw these two dudes in the audience, and one dude had a bald head, and the other guy had a bald head, and he said, if these two dudes put their heads together, they'll make an ass.
This is
he called him ass head.
This is another Red Fox joke. So he was talking about race relations in a Red Fox way, and there was a black mayor and LBJ, London Baines Johnson. They were at a bathroom at a stall, and LBJ looks down into the stall of Carl Stokes, and then LBJ asks Carl Stokes, "Oh man, how'd you get that?" referring to his penis. And then Carl Stokes says, "Oh, before I have sex, I tap my penis on the bedpost 3 times." And then LBJ was like, "Well, God, I'll be damned." So he goes home to Lady Bird, and he taps his penis on the bedpost 3 times, and then Lady Bird said, "Is that you, Carl Stokes?" Which is one of the greatest jokes. I listen to it repeatedly because it's brilliant. It's perfect. It's a perfect
fucking
joke.
Red Fox, man. You got to wash your ass. I think that's the greatest album. It's the greatest stand-up album ever.
Can you do an impression of the other one? Can each you do an impression? Can Keith do Kenny, and Kenny can do Keith?
Oh, you want me to do Kenny?
Yeah.
Shit, that's a... All right, let me do Kenny. So life's a bitch, and then you die. That's why we... how do I do Kenny? I do Keith. I don't know, man. I just don't care about anything. Yeah, man, whatever, dude. Like, just get stoned, man.
I don't talk like that. I certainly don't talk
I'm doing
that.
an impression.
That's a terrible impression of me, man. I have more energy and I don't just smoke marijuana. I smoke a lot.
You smoke a lot of weed.
I do smoke a lot of weed. I
smoke way more weed than I do.
But I think smoking weed gets you closer to God, man.
No,
I think
it's a theory.
I think it gets you closer to the universe.
Is there a joke or a premise or something that of another comedian that you wish you could steal in a way that it will no one will know it never even exists in the other person's act? It's like we're in another dimension. Everything's exactly the same except for this joke is your guy's joke.
Clark.
Oh yeah, he has this Dr. King joke.
Dr. King joke, like Martin Luther King. Clark Jones, like he says, Martin Luther King had to be a pastor because could you imagine if he worked at like fast food?
Like working at a Subway.
He had the same voice. It's so
That's
great.
Such a brilliant
it's
joke.
a brilliant joke.
That's brilliant.
If you guys could be in a tag team wrestling match against any 2 wrestlers, they could be a tag team existing, or you could assemble them to be who would it be?
Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels.
Oh, you want to fight them?
I want to fight Bret Hart.
I want to fight Bret Hart and Hart Foundation.
Hart Foundation.
Yeah.
So you want to do Anvil and Bret?
Yeah.
Or Bret and Owen?
Bret and Owen.
Bret and Owen.
Bret and Owen.
I want to fight Bret and Owen. I think that would be
a great technical.
Yeah. I mean, it would be awesome. That would be great to fight Bret and Owen.
you mentioned briefly. So, what is your favorite of Kevin Barnett's jokes? So, and I guess I'll mention earlier, but Kevin, your friend who you've known for forever, you always worked with, passed away recently.
Yes.
And you did a tribute show at Bell House, which I'll say is probably the best comedy show I've ever been to.
Oh, man.
It's just like as an experience, I was like, and I've been to more than most. I was like, this is really something.
Oh man, it was one of those things where it did feel like it felt religious. It felt like I felt like when I was back at church, it was like I've never seen people cry and laugh.
Yeah.
At the same time, and it was
cathartic.
It was cathartic to have experience with that group of people. And my favorite Kevin joke. Well, this is my favorite Kevin sketch. I have some jokes of this too, but my favorite Kevin sketch where I thought we got the full Kevin was it was a sketch where it was Lil Rel and Jennifer, and they were working at this strange place, and they were just having like this weird conversation, and then Jim burped. And Kevin ran out there and stabbed Rel to death, and then he gave like this speech about how no one could burp, and then they showed the sign of no burping, and it was this super absurd sketch that Jermaine wrote.
Yeah.
But you saw like Kevin at his he ran out there, he was screaming, he was at his loudest, then he got real charming. And I was like, that was Kevin, man. He was like a ball of energy, but he was able to just like make it so charming, and he had us all laughing, and I watch that sketch all the time.
Yeah,
it's just you really see like Kevin at his highest, because people see him thought he was just his writer. Yeah, and I was like, he was a dope writer. Don't get me wrong, he was one of the best writers, but he was also a great actor. Yeah. Like he was one of the top actors on the show, and he was just able to like.
And he was also a brilliant comedian, and I love the Black Wolverine. I mean, that's his probably one of his signature bit, but it's just quintessential Kevin, man. Like you get the anxiety, you get the cleverness, you get the setup, you get the detail, you get the subtle commentary on race relations, but in such a
but then it's how he tells the story.
Yeah,
right? Like you no one can tell a Kevin Barnett joke because he doesn't just tell jokes; he tells stories. Yeah. And you can't tell it like he tells it because he added.
He's not
pain.
A setup punch guy.
No.
It was masterful to watch him delve into stories and with the details and his delivery and all of it.
And the thing is, like, how he told it on stage was how he told it off stage. Yeah. How he told a story on stage was exactly
the exact same way.
So when people saw him tell a story, like, oh, this is how he tells stories all the time. And it was just a fucking honor and privilege to be able to hear him tell his infinitely brilliant stories, and
it's gonna be one of the things that's the most.
Yeah, that's what's gonna be missed the most. I mean, like he was just a fucking dynamic dude.
Yeah.
Stuff's been weird for me lately. I all of a sudden realized the other day that I wasn't who I thought I was. None of my dreams had come true. I went to this costume party and I realized that being black severely limits your costume options. Like just for once, I want to be able to go to a costume party dressed as Wolverine and not Black Wolverine. Tired of this, man. That happened this past Halloween. I was all excited. I'm like, yo, I'm about to dress as Wolverine. I'm gonna go to this costume shop, get these claws. It's gonna be so freaking cool. I get to the costume shop. I get to where the claws are at, and the claws got white knuckles on them for no reason. I was faced with the choice of either blackfacing these knuckles or going the same costume as I go as every year. Blade. And I don't even like Blade, but this is real life. There's no time for crying.
That's it for another episode of Good One. The Lucas Brothers are touring throughout the spring. For more info, check thelucasbros.com/dates. Follow the Lucas Brothers on Twitter @LucasBros. Good One is produced by Mike Comite, with production assistance from Marissa Melnick and research help from Matthew Silver. Justin D. Wright did our theme song. Rate our review and rate the show on Apple Podcasts. 5 stars, please. And hey, if you know anyone who might like the podcast, maybe tell them. What the heck? You can email any comments, questions, or laughing around suggestions to goodonepodcast@gmail.com. I'm Jesse David Fox, and you can follow me at Jesse David Fox. We'll be back next week with a new episode and a new joke. Have a good one.
That was a HeadGum podcast.